Today we're talking about the death of Walt Disney. Welcome to Teacup for One. My name is Matt and I have 2 degrees, and here on Teacup for One we love Disney, but we are not afraid to ask the hard-hitting Disney questions. Questions like, should the 7 Dwarfs be cancelled? Why hasn't Matt gotten an audition for Lion King?
Son, can you play me a memory?
And today we are asking one of the most taboo questions of all. Is Walt Disney frozen? Or is Walt Disney's head frozen? I'll be honest, I've spent my whole life hearing these rumors and I've just dismissed them as being totally ridiculous. But I'm about to see the Toronto premiere of a play that I think deals with this question, and of course, in true Teacup for One fashion, I cannot see a work of fiction without doing a deep dive into all the facts that inspired it. Anyway, let me just say, I do not think Walt is cryogenically frozen, but, and I can't believe I'm saying this, he could be. Do not take that clip out of context. I'm just saying it's not as far-fetched a theory as I've led my whole life believing. And that is solely because cryonics is a real thing. Not the part about being revived. That hasn't happened. But the whole thing about cryogenic preservation with the hope of being revived in the future when science is ready, like, that's real. And that blew my mind.
The possibility of life after death is explored in Phoenix, Arizona by the Cryonics Society. They believe that cryobiology, the freezing of biological matter, is the answer.
And not only have people been cryogenically frozen, but the first cryogenic freezing occurred on January 12, 1967, exactly 4 weeks after Walt Disney's passing.
A model demonstrates how one person, a California man who died of cancer, has already been frozen. A freezing liquid replaces the blood supply, and the subject is wrapped in aluminum foil and placed in a capsule at 220 degrees below 0 centigrade.
I mean, the timing is just like almost too perfect. Hey, maybe I'm just late to the party. Maybe all of this was common knowledge, but I'm sorry. The idea of being frozen for revival in the future is just so crazy. I mean, it's the plot to Austin Powers.
Yeah, baby!
I guess I just never seriously considered that people would put time, money, and research into trying it, but people have. And not just the body. That whole thing about maybe just Walt's head is frozen, like, that's a real thing too. That's the budget-friendly option. Whew. According to the website for Alcor, which is one of the main organizations that deals with cryonics, cryonics is the practice of preserving life by pausing the dying process using sub-freezing temperatures with the intent of restoring good health with medical technology in the future. Cryonics is currently the best known process for pausing the dying process in a way that allows for potentially restoring good health with medical technology in the future. Cryonics is an ambulance to the future. But before I talk about how Walt Disney fits into all of this, or doesn't, I think it's imperative when discussing cryonics to note that the practice is widely considered pseudoscience. My understanding, as someone who almost failed grade 11 biology, is that we have the technology to preserve the bodies, but there's no evidence to support that they can ever be revived. The Society for Cryobiology, aka a group of scientists that have a specialized interest in how cold temperatures affect biology, like the people that I would put the most trust into speaking on this subject, they issued a statement in 2018 that I think sums it up pretty well. The Society takes the position that the knowledge necessary for the revival of live or dead whole mammals following cryopreservation does not currently exist, and can come only from conscientious and patient research in cryobiology and medicine. In short, the act of preserving a body, head, or brain after clinical death and storing it indefinitely on the chance that some future generation may restore it to life is an act of speculation or hope, not science, and as such is outside the purview of the Society for Cryobiology. Now, with that said, there are reportedly over 500 bodies currently cryogenically frozen, but I'm fairly certain Walt Disney isn't one of them, and that's because of 2 testimonies. Well, 2 testimonies plus the cold, hard documentation that he was cremated. The first testimony comes directly from Walt's family. In 1972, Walt's daughter, Diane Disney Miller, wrote that Walt was not frozen and that she doubted he had even heard of cryonics. And yeah, you could write off those testimonies as family defending family, but you know who else went on record to say that Walt Disney was not cryogenically frozen? The guy who actually arranged the first cryonic freezing. His name was Robert Nelson. He was a former TV repairman who became the first president of the Cryonic Society of California, and he was one of the people behind the cryopreservation of Professor James Bedford, who was that first person to be frozen in 1967. Bob Nelson claimed in an interview, Walt Disney wanted to be frozen. Lots of people think he was, and that the body's in cold storage in his basement. The truth is, Walt missed out. He never specified it in writing, and when he died, the family didn't go for it. They had him cremated. I personally have seen his ashes. They're in Forest Lawn. 2 weeks later, we froze the first man. If Disney had been the first, it would have made headlines around the world and been a real shot in the arm for cryonics. But that's the way it goes. So, there's no way to know how much of the truth Bob was actually telling here, and people have speculated that he may have never actually met Walt Disney. He was just using the name and Walt's recent death, to help publicize his work in cryonics. But I feel pretty strongly that if there were any truth to Walt actually having been frozen, Bob would have capitalized on that fast. We would all know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Walt was in Bob's freezer. Nevertheless, the practice of cryogenic freezing has continued since 1967, and it has garnered its fair share of controversy. When I say its fair share of controversy, there was at least one instance where bodies thawed and were left to decompose, like in the desert. But I feel like you don't hear about that too often. Whenever the conversation turns to cryogenic freezing, it always comes back to Walt Disney. So that begs the question, why does this freezing rumor persist? If we go back to that statement from the Alcor website, I think there are some clues as to why we continue to associate this practice with Walt. Cryonics is currently the best known method for pausing the dying process in a way that allows potentially restoring good health with medical technology in the future. Cryonics is an ambulance to the future. They keep dropping the word future, which is pretty on brand for Walt. Because aside from his work as a pioneer in the film industry and the theme park industry, Walt was also a futurist. You could even say, first and foremost, Walt was a futurist. He was constantly looking for ways to move forward with progress and technology. He was known for saying, it's kind of fun to do the impossible. And I think that mentality is pretty clear when you look at the strides he made in the film industry and in developing Disneyland. But his interest in progress expanded outside of the entertainment industry, and I think a perfect illustration of this is Tomorrowland. Yes, Tomorrowland. The debatably worst land in Disneyland and Magic Kingdom. Now, just hear me out. When Walt was building Disneyland, he developed the Disneyland television series as a means of both funding and advertising his theme park venture. And all those themed lands of Disneyland also served as genres for episodes of the TV show. So, for a Fantasyland episode, they would air excerpts of cartoons from the Walt Disney Studio. For Frontierland episodes, they would air the Davy Crockett content. For the Adventureland episodes, they would air the nature documentaries, Rest in Peace Lemmings. But when it came to Tomorrowland, Walt didn't have a ton of pre-existing content, so he commissioned animator Ward Kimball to produce a series of episodes about space travel and how space travel could be achieved with the science that was known and available at the time. These episodes aired in 1956, and they sparked widespread interest in space travel as something that could actually be achieved. These episodes have gone down in history because they really promoted science fact over science fiction.
We went to the moon in 1969.
Lo and behold, less than 15 years after those episodes aired, we went to the moon for the first time. Well, not we, you and I had nothing to do with it. But that happened largely because of the work that was done by the scientists who were brought on to discuss space travel in these Tomorrowland episodes. And I just feel like that is the ultimate example of Walt Disney solidifying himself in the public eye as a futurist. Just imagine, it's the 1950s. You're sitting down in front of your little black and white television. Walt Disney comes on the TV and he looks you in the eye through the screen and he says, listen kid, space travel, it's a real thing. It's possible. It is seemingly an impossible dream, but Walt Disney is right there on the TV telling you it can happen. And then 15-ish years later, it happens.
We went to the moon in 1969.
And space travel was just a drop in the bucket for Walt's futurist dreams, because of course, his passion project was crafting the utopian city of the future.
We call it Epcot.
But I think it's important to note that Walt's original vision for Epcot was not a delightful pub crawl around the world. No, I'll just say it. Low-key, Walt's original vision for Epcot was kind of terrifying. Chances are you've heard the story about how Walt Disney World as we know it today came to be. Walt went out to Florida, he bought up a ton of land as shell companies, and then ultimately got the giant plot that is currently where Walt Disney World sits. Now, he was going to build a theme park, but that was just one part of his plan, because his priority with that space was to create the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. Epcot. In fact, Walt's last major TV/on-screen appearance was in his short film that was pitching the concept of Epcot.
Epcot will always be a showcase to the world for the ingenuity and imagination of American free enterprise.
In the short, he talks about how Epcot would be a city built from scratch, optimizing city planning by utilizing the hub and spoke model that worked so well in Disneyland, and eliminating all the logistical nightmares of modern city life, specifically pertaining to traffic. Okay, I can get on board. People would travel around Epcot using monorails and people movers, just like the transportation systems we see at Disney World and Disneyland, but that would be a part of your daily life. I mean, monorail every day, sign me up. Cars would be allowed in Epcot, but they would all travel underground. No cars on the surface in Epcot, because that would allow for more open green space. I'm with you on the open green space, but what was that about controlling how I drive? Everyone who lived in Epcot would work in Epcot and play a crucial role in its ongoing success. I'm sorry, this is starting to sound a little cult-like. Yeah, like when you read between the lines of the original Epcot plans, it's a little unsettling. But surely that's because they only had 25 minutes to pitch the project, right? Like when you read in more depth about what Walt actually wanted to do with Epcot, it's probably better, right? No, it's worse. There are reports that everyone who was going to live in Epcot would be required to work in Epcot, thus ensuring that everybody had a job, with the intention of preventing like low income or slum areas from developing. And in order to keep those unruly teenagers in line, to stop their hooligan shenanigans from ruining the integrity of Epcot, there was going to be a dedicated teen center where they could all hang out, and some kind of system by which the teenagers would report their peers or like assess how well they were behaving or something. I mean, it sounds like a very okay boomer concept, but the cruel irony is the fact that the baby boomers were the teenagers that Walt was trying to control the behavior of. Nobody in Epcot would own property, which in turn would mean that they had no municipal voting rights. Apparently the no homeowners thing was solely because Walt wanted to maintain ownership over all the homes, so that all the homes could be updated every few months or like every few years with the latest and greatest technology and appliances. I mean, this whole thing, it was truly an experimental prototype community of tomorrow, with experimental being the key word. Walt wanted to create a space where he could just bleep around and find out. Find out what worked in the ideal city, with the goal being to inspire the rest of the world to adopt the practices that worked. Honestly, I don't think it's a horrible idea, minus the fact that it was all kind of hinging on using human guinea pigs. Walt was a visionary, there is no doubt about that, but at the same time, I don't think he was the most realistic when it came to accepting that not everyone would share his view of how systems could work, or how people could live. I mean, that's pretty clear when you look at how he ran his animation studio in the early days. He was concerned that relationships between the men in the animation department and the women in the ink and paint department would hinder productivity, and so he did his best to absolutely prohibit it, but at the same time, he met his wife in the ink and paint department, so like, hashtag hypocrisy, but whatever. The point is, he tried to control dating between the departments, and it didn't work. If anything, it made the animators and the ink and paint girls date even harder. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. When you look at the events that led up to the animator strike of 1941, you almost get a sense of what happened when Walt got close to running a community. And spoiler alert, it wasn't magical. But now again, to play devil's advocate, I don't know that Epcot would have actually gotten to the point where people were living there. I'd like to think there were enough people around Walt who would have helped him to shift the goal, possibly to a version of what Epcot is today as a theme park, sort of like a space to get people excited about the potential technology that we could use in our everyday life. Actually, Epcot today is nothing like that. But this is the thing about the Epcot concept. Something that monumental would require a lifetime of work, and Walt only started work on it in the last chapter of his life. Many people have said that the reason Epcot didn't happen the way Walt originally planned was because Walt was the only person who had the vision and the drive to make it happen, and the sad reality is that he died before any real progress could be made. So I think that's why the freezing rumors continue to persist. If something as seemingly far-fetched as sending a human to the moon could become a reality, then why not freezing somebody as a fast pass to the future? And if anyone was going to make that happen, it would have to be someone like Walt Disney. Someone with the drive, someone with the passion, and someone with the money. But I don't believe that's what happened. He was cremated. But it has great potential for a play. And I'm very much hoping that this play lives up to that potential. Let's find out. Let's go. Let's go.
Come with me to Soulpepper Theatre in Toronto's historic distillery district to see the first preview of a public reading of an unproduced screenplay about the death of Walt Disney, but not really because I already went and you weren't there. Contrary to the title, this was neither a reading nor a screenplay, it's a legit straight play. Upon arrival, we all received these mini screenplays, which turned out to be the playbill, and inside on the first page there was a quote commonly attributed to Walt, but it's something he never actually said. I don't know if that historic inaccuracy was intentional, but it definitely set the tone for the whole evening. Now, as soon as you walk into the space, it is like going back in time. The set design, the production design, the costuming, everything was immaculate. This was a semi-immersive production, so you were like within an arm's reach of the performers at all time. It was incredible. As for the play itself, it's kind of a dark take on the legacy of Walt Disney. It deals with some real-life history like the Lemming drama, it sensationalizes history like the whole Epcot thing, and they outright give legitimacy to the claim that he froze himself, which he didn't. I still don't know how I feel about the text, but this cast was phenomenal. Check out the production if you can.
Okay, I am back, and wow! There's a lot to discuss. Right, Walt? Right. Before I give you my review on the show, I'll give you a brief overview about what it is exactly, because this thing's title, a public reading of an unproduced screenplay about the death of Walt Disney, it's very confusing. The title actually tells you everything that this is not. But anyway, it is a play. It's a 4-person play, and the concept is that you are an audience who's been invited to a table read of a screenplay that Walt Disney has written about his life. There are 4 characters: Walt, his brother Roy, Walt's daughter Diane, and Diane's husband, Ron. The play cycles through the behind-the-scenes happenings of Walt's legacy, and it starts off relatively factual. It touches on some of the company's darker moments, like the mass Lemming unaliving, and Walt going up against the animators in the animator strike of 1941. Then it moves into Walt's vision for Epcot. It frames him as a tyrant who wants to build and control the world's greatest city, which then puts him at odds with Roy, who insists on behalf of the board that he just build another theme park and not the world's greatest city. And peppered throughout all this are references to a guy in Irvine who apparently freezes people, and the play culminates in Walt's eventual death and freezing. Off the top of the play, Walt is introduced as the warm, friendly Uncle Walt persona, and the first few moments of the play were actually like being inside of one of those classic episodes of Disneyland. But as the play progresses, you start to see Walt's true colors, at least in the world of this specific play. And his true colors reveal him to be an egocentric, narcissistic tyrant. He is obsessed with his public image. He tells Roy to take the blame for the animator strike so that he can maintain his Walt Disney name, because that's where all the money is. And eventually he threatens to kill Roy if Roy disagrees with him. And there's also more than one reference to Walt throwing his Oscar at Roy. Actually, Roy was wearing a band-aid for most of the play. I feel like that's because the Oscar hit him. Maybe? Walt also threatens to disinherit Diane if she doesn't name her next child after him, because to him, that's how he continues his legacy after he dies. Diane has a breakdown. She reveals that she hates Walt and she can't bear to name his son after him, because if she does, every time I look at the child, it'll be unfair, and he'll know that I feel differently about him up against his siblings, because when I look at him, I'll just think of you, and remember how horrible you are, and the big stunt that you pulled at my wedding, and how scared I am of you. No shade to the actress who played Diane, because her performance was actually incredible. The Diane monologue is a very sore point for me with this text, but we'll get there.
Basically, Diane doesn't want to name her kid after Walt because it would be a lifelong reminder of how scared she was of her dad. Truly, this play gives us a very tyrannical characterization of Walt, which, like, honestly, I should have seen that coming, because all the marketing for this play has been saying that it is a story about a man who makes magical movies who is anything but magical. I don't know how I feel about this show. I think the production that I saw, the specific production I saw at Soulpepper Theater, was phenomenal and absolutely worth seeing. Cast, tech, design, direction, it all came together beautifully. The rapport between Diego Matamoros as Walt and Anand Rajaram as Roy is incredible. The first half of the play is really just the two of them sparring back and forth, and like not a beat was dropped, not a thought was lost. They just bring so much thought and specificity to the text. Watching those two is incredible. And equally impressive are the actors who play Ron and Diane. Like, their scene work was great, but what really stood out to me and what I loved was watching them react. I mean, they are both silent for pretty well the first half of the play, but like just watching their active listening and their commentary on Walt's behavior through reactions alone was phenomenal. But with all that said, there is a lot of good about this production, but I'm conflicted with how I feel about it as a piece of theater overall. And I think that's entirely to do with the script, or I guess not entirely, mostly to do with the script. Now, admittedly, I am a Disney person. I have above average knowledge of Disney and Disney history. So yes, I had to stop myself from actuallying my way through this entire play. And yeah, like, it's to be expected. There were a ton of historical inaccuracies. There were some historical inaccuracies that were just objectively wrong, but overall harmless. Like, they portray Walt as being present for the building of Walt Disney World, which of course he wasn't. He had passed away by then, and it was Roy's final project to actually get Disney World up, built, and on its feet. But then there are the historical inaccuracies that I personally feel are harmful. Pretty well entirely to do with the fact that this text is portraying Walt as an abusive, ego-driven tyrant who endlessly threatened his family. But I went to see it with one of my friends, and when we were talking about the play afterwards, I kind of expressed all of this, and he made a good point, which was to say, I didn't go to this production to see a documentary about Walt Disney. And, I mean, that's totally fair, but it makes me wonder then, why was this play written about Disney? Like, was this play just written with the intent of being an expose to slander Walt Disney the man, as well as Walt Disney the company specifically? I don't think so. But if it's not that, then I guess the text is just meant to be a cautionary tale about a billionaire sacrificing his humanity in a quest for immortality? Like Citizen Kane and Mouse Ears? It feels like the Disney element is just there to sell tickets to a text that I don't find all that thought-provoking or emotionally resonant. You know, the immersive quality of this production specifically is cool, especially for a Disney fan like me, but once you kind of get past that, there's not much else to take away from the play. I mean, if it's going to be a play about Walt Disney, make it about Walt Disney. Commit to the satire about the specifics of him and his company. And with that said, I'm not a Walt apologist. You know, I don't like it when his character is misrepresented as being this beacon of perfection, you know? Or even Walt being misrepresented as the guy who originally drew Mickey Mouse. Hashtag justice for Ub Iwerks. But I also don't care for his character being misrepresented in the opposite direction. It is important to acknowledge his flaws, his mistakes, and his misjudgments, but I don't think there's a reason to craft a narrative implying that he was abusive, narcissistic, or had ulterior motives to his business decisions. Now, granted, I stand behind my statement that the original concept for Epcot was low-key terrifying, but there's no way to know what his motivations were behind building his ideal city of the future. In my heart, I guess I'd like to believe he was driven more by innovation than a narcissistic need to control how all of America lives, but like there's no way to know what was going on in his head. So you know what? Fine. That's fair game to speculate on in this text. But what I don't see the benefit to is fabricating details about domestic violence about a real-life person who still has family alive today, especially when none of the names of the characters or their identities were changed. You know, Roy is the name of Walt's real-life brother, Ron is the name of Walt's real-life son-in-law, and Diane's the name of Walt's real-life daughter, and truthfully, the part that made me the most uncomfortable about this text was how it portrayed Diane. Diane in this play has the most passionate display of someone who's been hurt by Walt's actions, and in real life,
Diane Disney Miller spoke about how she didn't care for the fact that her dad was being misrepresented by history, and that motivated her to start the Walt Disney Family Museum as a means of preserving the memory of who her father was, just as a person.
My dad was a person with a lot of drive, huge curiosity, great love of life and people, and everything that makes you human also was what made him human.
I don't know, it just gives me the ick that this play portrays Diane as someone who is a victim of a narcissistic patriarch, when in real life, Diane's passion project was creating this museum to make sure that her father's memory wasn't tarnished or misrepresented by media like this. It's actually kind of poetic and ironic, don't you think? It's like rain on your wedding day. Anyway, maybe I could get on board with this text being littered with alternative facts if that was the point, you know, as a means of making a commentary on fact versus fiction with regard to historical figures, specifically those who are revered by society, but it doesn't. I'll say it again, it's Citizen Kane and Mouse Ears. This play could have just as easily been about a generic billionaire and unfolded in the exact same way without the Disney overlay. But when you take away the Disney overlay, I think it just highlights how mediocre this script is. Anyway, in conclusion, I don't think the script is good, but the production at Soulpepper Theatre is excellent. If you're in Toronto, see it for the acting. See it for the production design, but just don't see it hoping for a clever satire on Walt Disney or the themes of progress and futurism that make his real-life story so engaging. Anyway, friends, with that, this concludes yet another episode of Teacup for One. Now let me know in the comment section down below, what do you think about this whole Walt Disney freezing rumor? What do you think about the Epcot project? Is that a place you would have wanted to live? And if you want to be the first to know when I release more videos talking about Disney history, movies, Shakespeare, sometimes cats, make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed already. And if you haven't subscribed already, it is so easy. All you have to do is click on my face. Thanks for joining me today, everyone. My name is Matt, and I have 2 degrees, and that's the tea cup for one. Go away.